To understand the economy, you have to understand human nature.
This podcast is powered by Acast.
Good morning. The world has changed utterly.
USA, USA, USA.
John is
USA,
sitting here
USA.
with his MAGA cap on. He's got his Bitcoin wallet out. He's tearing up the Ukrainian flag. He's got the Star of David. He knows the world is changing. We are discussing, of course, and reacting to an amazing result for Donald Trump. An amazing result for the MAGA movement. They have won, well, it looks now, John.
Yeah.
The Senate, the Congress, the Presidency, the popular vote.
The popular vote is the big one.
And the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
So if you think
he's a massive, massive mandate to do whatever the hell he wants now.
If you think of, so just a quick note on the architecture of American politics and American power. The founding fathers in the United States, who are kind of genuflected to a little bit obsequiously, I think.
Oh, yeah.
On the basis that these were, slave owning, godlike. But because they pulled away from a king and a monarch, they did have a fear of despotism, of a Trumpian type character emerging. So their checks and balances were pretty impressive in terms of how they tried to A, curb the power of the president, B, increase the power of the people, C, increase the power of the states. So it became the United States of America, not just one big country. And of course, D, create a legal system in parallel called the Supreme Court, where you could argue, every American citizen could argue if something the president did was constitutional or unconstitutional. So there were these really quite impressive checks and balances within the system. Again, all designed to try and subvert the power of an omnipotent president.
Yes.
Which is exactly what we have now. And ironically, remember we mentioned Teddy Roosevelt last week?
Yeah.
It was Teddy Roosevelt that changed the way in which America was governed because he centralized more and more power in the executive of the president, the White House, during this period because he said, look, we don't have enough power and we can't run the country. And what we're going to focus on today...
Trump is going to be doing even more of that.
But he's got everything now.
Yeah.
He's got everything. So as you say, he can do, in effect, what he wants, when he wants, with what part of the country. And of course, what the Americans experienced in the last hours isn't so much an election. It's almost like a divorce. It's like a breakup, right? And, half of the Americans hate him and half of the Americans love him. So it's almost like you're dealing with a country that is going through a divorce. And you can see that particularly now in the reaction of Democrats, They've lost the House, the Senate, the presidency, obviously, the Supreme Court, the popular vote, and still they're saying, and you know why this is? Because they're transphobe, racists, sexist, homophobic, stupid, right? That's the wrong lesson. That is the lesson. That is the lesson of somebody who is very, very angry. So what we're going to do, John, before we discuss, we're going to look at Bitcoin, BB, as in Netanyahu, and Berlin, as in the Washington-Berlin axis, i.e. the Washington-Europe axis, particularly against a background.
The three Bs.
Three Bs. But first, I want to talk to you about the 5 stages of an emotional breakup, John. Because that is what America's going through. It's the divorce they're going through. And that's the framework that we're going to look at the next, I'd say, few weeks and months, right?
Before you get there, did you see his speech?
I heard a little bit of it.
And one of the lines that he said was, many people are telling me, the way he does, many people are telling me that God spared my life to save the country and to restore it to greatness. So this is the mindset he's gone in with. But what I do find interesting, before we get to the divorce bit, what I do find interesting is the people that were surrounding him during the night. So back in 2020, it was the likes of Rudy Giuliani, who was out of his head by all accounts, and Steve Bannon, and the Pillow Man, and all those crazies. But this year, it was Elon Musk, RFK Jr., Tucker Carlson, guys that are, whether you agree
big
or not.
people in the American
sharp
background
people
noise
as well. And Trump spent, Jesus, it was nearly 10 minutes talking about Elon and his rockets in his acceptance speech.
Well, the fascinating thing is, and again, I come back to Roosevelt, Elon is to Trump what Rockefeller was to Roosevelt.
Right, yeah.
And Roosevelt turned against Rockefeller. So I would say this relationship looks fantastic right now.
Yeah.
But watch this space. Because
I think Elon will
two
realize,
massive egos in the room.
Yeah.
Right?
But Elon will also realize this guy's a bit of a fuckwit.
Or maybe Trump will realize this guy's a bit of a fuckwit.
Maybe.
He's good at putting up rockets, but he's got no sense of democracy. Not surprising you're brought up in apartheid South Africa.
Trump.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but Trump doesn't have a sense of democracy
He's
either.
just won the popular vote. How can he not have a sense of democracy?
I know.
John, he's the most democratically successful person we've ever seen.
Yes,
he's
I know.
got a great sense of democracy. And one of his great
But if he
sense
didn't
of
win,
democracy,
he wouldn't.
But he did win, John.
Okay, fair enough.
Look, I'm going to go. See, you are sounding like, do you know the stage of divorce, right? This is what you're going through, right?
I'm like CNN.
There are 5 stages of divorce: there's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. This is what
I'm depressed
you
at the
libtards
moment.
are going to go through, right? Okay. Okay. So what it's going to be, right?
Look at you with your MAGA hat on.
Okay, yeah. So the denial is this idea, and you can hear it now on the airwaves straight away, and you'll hear it for the next week. It's kind of like shell-shocked, right?
Yeah.
That the Democratic establishment, I want to say the establishment, I mean everything from Bruce Springsteen to Eminem to Beyonce.
Yeah.
That establishment, right?
Tay-Tay, of all people.
Tay-Tay of all places, right? Every single megastar that came out for Kamala, probably the most distressing figure I heard if I were a Democrat is the following, John, that Kamala Harris did not improve on Joe Biden's result in 2020 in any county.
That's right. In any county, not just state.
Not state, any district or county, right? So she was, I feel very sorry for her. She was completely rejected by the American people. What Trump did was something fascinating, is his ability to isolate different focus groups or interest groups and be their champion. I'm going to talk about Bitcoin in a minute, but he came out for crypto, right?
Yeah.
For Bitcoin. But one of the things we know about Bitcoin is the people who own Bitcoin are the very rich and the very poor. So the very rich are the people who own big, and me, yes, exactly. But we're along for the ride, John. We're along for the ride. But in general, it's the very rich, the sort of tech bros who bought it all up in 2010.
And the Michael Saylors.
And the very, very poor, the desperate, the people, because it's like buying a lottery ticket. So who are the very, very poor? Poor white and poor black men own Bitcoin in higher proportions to everybody else. And his way kind of encircling them, getting them to vote for him, saying, I'm in your camp, right?
Yeah.
And that was just an example of what Trump is good at. He's good at understanding that there is no such thing as the American people. There are 50, 60, 70 subgroups who identify coalesce around certain ideas.
Yeah.
And he picked them off one by one.
Yeah.
Does it mean there's a coherent whole? Of course not.
Yeah.
But does it work as an electoral strategy?
And there was an 18% swing in the Latino male vote.
Which again was fantastic. But I come back to that idea of, Trump representing a certain type of male and a certain type of bloke. And again, what is fascinating for me, and it goes back to what our friend Tom Frank was saying, is that the Democratic Party have lost the working class. Right? The working men, or what they call, the average working American. And they sometimes call the middle class Americans, the average working American, that they've lost them.
Yeah.
They banked on black working class that didn't come out in great numbers. They thought they owned the trade union class, the white working class. They didn't come out in great numbers. And they have flipped, right? And so if you look at the next while, because I think there's going to be, let's look at 2 time horizons, right? It's the next 6 to 8 months of America. How do they deal? And we're going to go to the phases, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So right now they're in the denial phase. They're kind of shell shocked, right? And I'm on a relationship website, John, right? And it says, you don't want to believe your relationship is coming to an end. You may not want to talk or even be able to think about it. You may isolate yourself, continuing as if nothing has changed, refuse to cooperate with any plans, feel overwhelmed by the enormity of change and feelings. This can cause frustration in your partner.
Are you trying to tell me something, Mac?
I am trying to tell you.
Are we breaking up?
John, look, it's not you, it's me, right? I've changed.
Well, I always knew that.
I've changed. No, but look at it in the context of the divorce, right?
Yeah.
The next phase, this phase now with the Liberals and the Democrats, and I put in there the Irish government because we made our bed with the Democrats. We decided to go with one party.
Yeah.
You know, all that greening of the White House and all that stuff, right? I'm talking about the Irish establishment too, right? Because we thought, oh my God, we've got to get in bed with the Democrats. In a 2-horse race, kind of silly. So let's talk about it. So the first one is denial. I think it'll go on for the next little while.
Mm-hmm.
Then there'll be anger.
Yes.
Okay, this is the relationship, John, just between you and I when we start breaking up, right? Because again, America has broken up from itself.
Yeah.
Both parties feel this, but perhaps at different times, John. It is heavy with blame and often reflects a cynical dissecting of events within the relationship. Explosive arguments, even abusive behaviors can be triggered. These emotions often mask the pain and can prevent somebody from facing reality.
Well, I actually heard somebody this morning talking about, Kamala Harris, she was the wrong candidate. It should have been Newsom in there.
They are going to hammer poor old Kamala.
Yeah.
They are going to hammer her, right? Because they need somebody to blame. And in the anger phase, they're going to point the finger.
Or pointing at Joe Biden, he didn't stand down soon enough.
All that stuff, right?
Yeah.
Rather than point internally and say, hold on, the relationship is broken.
Yeah.
Right? We need to figure this out. We need to be honest. As they say in AA, John.
You're in the AA as well.
As they say in AA, you need a thoroughgoing moral inventory of yourself.
AA and relationships.
This is all good, but this is the American psyche. We're dealing with the American psyche. Because, I mean,
my therapist said,
as we say at the start of the podcast, to understand the economy, to understand human behavior, you got to get into the psychology. So basically, anger is going to be pretty nasty. It's like, you'll never see the children again.
Yeah.
No, that sort of thing, right? And again, in the same way as relationships take hostage of certain parts, the Democrats will do exactly the same thing. As you said, it was her fault. It was their fault. It was the white working class fault. It was Elon Musk's fault. It was the tech bros fault, etc. So that's the anger. Then the third phase, and I think this will come maybe before Christmas, maybe after, we'll see, right, is the bargaining phase. And this in relationship is not just financially, but it's actually emotionally. How you act at this stage reflects what you're thinking about. If you are focused on trying to save the relationship, some common behaviors will also include, I swear to God, I'll change. Forgive me. I'll be different.
I've heard it all before from you, Mac.
Yeah, I know, exactly. I swear to God, I didn't mean to do that. And this is what's going to happen. The Democrats will do this because they're still in with a stake. They still have a 49% stake in the society. Right. I
wonder when you say that it might happen before Christmas. I suppose it probably will, because before the inauguration in January, okay, let's just kind of get back together again or have an amicable relationship.
When you see, when Trump came out, I'm going to heal. Yeah. I'm going to heal. He has no intention of fucking healing, right?
Yeah, no.
But I'm going to heal. But this is the process, and it will be quite fascinating how the liberal establishment across the bureaucracies, like the Federal Reserve, we'll talk about this in a minute, right? All the various different agencies of the American state deal with this breakup, particularly as Elon is going to come out and figure out the bureaucracy. And then the fourth stage, John, is depression. This is not to be confused with denial, according to the relationship counselor.
Oh.
It often comes from deep sadness and grieving, the darkest period where hope in the future appears lost, and a wave of emotion is so overwhelming, sometimes even debilitating, right? Coping with day-to-day routines becomes hard. This is on a personal level, but you can see this happening again in America.
For sure. Whereas
massive hopelessness on the part of people who believe in the liberal agenda, people who believe in the world order as articulated by the Americans.
As the tariffs go up and the deportations are being shipped out.
Exactly. And as America says to Europe, not sure about paying for your missiles anymore. Not particularly sure about this. What does it do to the World Health Organization? What does it do to the IMF? What does it do to the World Bank?
Sure,
These are all institutions that were set up in the heyday of Keynesian economics at the end of the Second World War, and they have remained very much part of American power. And Trump is like, I don't care about them.
Yeah.
So there will be a sort of a depression in those areas. And again, I come back to Ireland. If it becomes clear that tariffs and trade wars and sanctions and whatever he's going to do come with the classic idea that, you know what, all those Apples and Googles, we'd like you to come back to San Francisco. We'd like you to come back to California.
Mm-hmm.
But he won't put anything in California because they voted against him.
Yes,
right?
That's true. Yeah.
Texas,
Yeah.
right? Then the fifth stage is acceptance, that the Democrats accept that Trump and Trumpism is a real thing. It's not an aberration. It's not a one-off. It's not because people are xenophobic or racist or homophobic or transphobic or any phobic at all. It's a real thing. The relationship counselor says, John, the feelings of being in control of your life again, being able to see the future, accepting that you are not getting your old life or relationship back. So they're not getting the America of Obama back. It's not happening, right?
Yeah.
That as you said, so many of the underlying issues in the society have changed profoundly. And the election, we should always look at election is evidence.
Yeah.
An election is evidence, and evidence of a change demography, a change political infrastructure, all that sort of stuff.
I wonder, will that happen 2 years in, when it comes to midterm elections?
Yes.
Will that be
it's probably better. Yeah, you're probably better to push out a wee bit of next year.
Yeah, to see. And then there might be a chink of light in if one of the houses, the Senate or the House of Representatives.
Flips back over.
Yeah.
So, the relationship counselor, John, would say, shorthand for this is just get a good lawyer.
How much do we owe your one then?
Exactly.
Our therapist.
Our therapist, yes. You can come on in. You can come on in. We are both prostrate here. We've gone from Freud to God, Freud to Jesus and back to Freud. But that, I think, is a good way if you want to understand what is going to happen in the United States, but not just in the United States. This is the key. In the United States' allies that banked on the security of the relationship between Washington and the rest of us, which was called the Washington Consensus, whether it be to do with Russia, the European Union, the IMF, all those relationships will be fractured. And that 5-stage process, people will go through. And I think it's a good framework for the next couple of years.
You started by talking about the 3 Bs, Bitcoin, BB, and Berlin.
Yeah.
So let's get into that after a bit of this.
Welcome back. I just want to give you a little update. At Kilkenomics, we are going to deal with the Trumpquake like no other. This weekend in Kilkenny, we have some of the finest minds in the world coming in. And again, this has changed the discussion. This is going to be the only thing that people are going to discuss. We're going to have sessions on Trump and the Middle East. We're going to have sessions on Trump and the economy. The domestic economy, that is. We're going to have sessions on Trump, tariffs, and the international economy. And we're going to have discussions about the nature of American democracy, because everything has been upended. So much so that John said that Trump wasn't even Democrat despite getting 90 million votes, or whatever he got. Okay. Anyway, there we go.
Hitler was democratically elected.
He was a fine Democrat until he wasn't. Anyway, that is all. If you are around, it's in Kilkenny starting tonight. John and I have a live podcast.
We do.
At 7 o'clock odd in the Watergate Theatre. I think there's actually a handful of tickets left for that. So if you're around, come down for that. And we're going to explore a couple of these things. But then over the course of the weekend, have a look at kilkenomics.com. And we hope to see you in Kilkenny.
See you there.
See you there.
So you were talking earlier about the 3 Bs.
Yes.
So explain that to me. Bitcoin, BB, and Berlin.
Right. So I want to talk about these 3. We're reacting quickly to this, right? But I want to talk about 3 issues. Back to our favorite, Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
So Bitcoin is surging now. It is surging because...
In fact, all the markets are surging.
All the markets are surging, right?
Yeah.
But Bitcoin in particular, because Trump identified Bitcoin and the Bitcoiners as a constituency. Now, I don't believe he's a great believer in crypto, Bitcoin, etc. I just think he wanted their vote.
Yeah.
But they have decided, and probably rightly so, that they need a little bit of payback. And what I think that Bitcoin, so you know what I've always thought of Bitcoin, it's not money. it is a speculative digital asset. Goes up, goes down. I bought a bit of it just to go along for the ride.
Yeah.
Okay. But in effect, Bitcoin is a lobby group. And if you look at it as a lobby group, the people who own Bitcoin, particularly the large, what they call the whales, right?
Mm-hmm.
The people who own it are trying to lobby the American SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, to allow Bitcoin to be traded more openly and on various different platforms.
Yeah.
So it's consistently lobbying for its own legitimacy.
Yeah.
Right? Now, if something that started as an anti-establishment, anti-finance, anti-SEC digital asset is now lobbying the very SEC, the financial markets, etc., you know something has changed in it. And what has changed, of course, is the fact that the people who own Bitcoin are very cynically trying to make it part of the mainstream. Now, one of the people who was very much against Bitcoin was Joe Biden.
Yeah.
Because Joe Biden believes in the Fed and the dollar and the things we understand as the American bond market, right?
Yeah.
Our Bitcoiners don't believe in that stuff. They want to tear it all down. This is part of the sort of Elon worldview. Tear it all down and replace it. And of course, Gary Gensler, who was the chairman of the SEC, the US SEC, was very much somebody who said, hold on a second, Bitcoin is a speculative asset. I don't want this to be traded by every Tom, Dick and Harry, every sort of moms and pops sort of Scottish widows pension fund, right? Trump went after him at a Bitcoin conference about 2 months ago. He got a massive a massive round of applause. And he said, I didn't realize the guy was so unpopular. Bing bong, light bulb, let's go after him.
Yeah.
Back to your attack.
Yes, yeah.
So the reason that Bitcoin is going up is because the lobby group that is Bitcoin believe now that they are the barbarians at the gate, to use that old financial expression, right? And the gate will be manned by somebody who will open the bloody gate.
Yes.
Called Trump and whoever he puts in there.
Yeah.
And that, of course, is why Bitcoin is surging. The other more cynical and more depressing, and maybe we'll discuss it tomorrow on stage, John, is the idea that Bitcoin is a bet on Armageddon.
I was going to say that because it is an Armageddonist kind of concept, and people, rely on it in times of trouble. But if that kind of goes against this whole new presidency, that if he's got such a powerful mandate that, and he's going to fix everything, well, then you don't really need this Armageddonist.
Well, I suppose the whole thing, it's one of the fascinating things about tech bros, Bitcoin bros, and the crypto world is where the Venn diagram sort of locates them. They tend to be pro-Putin. Mm-hmm. They tend to be anti-establishment, kind of anti-America, but they're anti-America as global policeman. This is the interesting thing.
Yeah.
And so what Trump is kind of saying to them is, look, we ain't going to be the global policeman anymore. Mm-hmm. We don't want to do that. Yeah. That is not part of it. We are going back to an almost 19th century isolationist America, right? The Andrew Jackson, fellow who was born in County Antrim.
Yeah.
That worldview. And that is kind of Armageddon enough for the Bitcoiners, because it means that all the architecture, the financial architecture that's been built up over the last 60 years will be not set aside, but will be undermined.
Yeah.
And then they will emerge. So Bitcoiners hooting and hollering today in great form. As I've always said, buy it by all means, go along for the ride, but it ain't going to replace money.
Yeah.
Unless you believe that the United States is going to enter at the end of this Trump administration a massive fiscal debt dollar crisis, which we may touch on tomorrow, John. Which we may touch on tomorrow.
Look forward to that. Yeah, there's lots to explore there. So what's the second B?
So the first B was Bitcoin, but that's basically a reflection of the financial implications, right? So Bitcoin being the canary in the coal mine, so to speak, right? Second B is BB, is Israel.
Yeah.
So
Netanyahu
Trump now will give BB, Trump's son-in-law will be marketing condos on the
waterfront in Gaza.
In the waterfront of Khan Yunis, right? He will.
Yeah.
He will, right?
Absolutely he will.
Because you have this weird, remember we talked about Trump isolating the Bitcoiners and using them as a constituency. Evangelical Christians, same, right?
Yeah.
Evangelical Christians have certain part of them have a fundamentalist attachment to Judea and Samaria, which is what they call the West Bank. So there's a weird, unholy alliance of fundamental Orthodox Jewish settlers and fundamentalist Christian.
Because they want to, we were just talking about Armageddon, they want to speed up
the rapture, John, the rapture.
Bring on the rapture.
Bring on the rapture. Yeah. And again, they're both
go up to heaven with their Bitcoin.
They're with their Bitcoin, exactly. St. Peter,
yeah.
Any chance lets in, right? But what is fascinating is what ties both of those movements at the hip is the Bible, the Torah and the Bible, which are in effect the same book, right? Written by the
Old Testament.
Written by the same geezers, more or less, the same types of people, right?
Yeah. Same publishing house.
Yeah. Random house. Exactly. Highly random house. Okay. Anyway, so what he's going to do is he's going to say to Netanyahu, look, what Netanyahu wants to do, I saw Netanyahu being described as Israel's Bismarck, which was very provocative. It was by Neil Ferguson, the historian. Now, so just park the actual fighting and look at the geopolitics of what Netanyahu is trying to do. Let's do it with no bias or compulsion and say he's wrong, he's right. Just let's look at the facts, right?
Yeah.
What he's trying to do, the Bismarck idea is that Bismarck unified, expanded Germany by war, by conquest.
Yeah.
First against the Austrians, then against the Danes, then against the French. So in a period from 1860 to 1870, Bismarck beat the Austrians, the Danes, and the French in wars with the explicit idea of unifying a disparate country, which was different religions, it was Protestant, Catholic, all that sort of stuff, under Prussia.
Yeah.
And he did this much to the chagrin of the liberals in Germany, who thought he was a warmonger, but he was also regarded by the right-wing Prussian militarists as not military enough, right?
Right, okay.
And he is now seen as this great unifying leader who introduced all these things. Now, it's an inflammatory idea that Netanyahu could be for Israel what Bismarck was for Germany. So he's now, because the Israelis' tails are up in Lebanon, in Syria, they're going to draw them in, of course, in Gaza, and ultimately their idea is to isolate Iran. Trump, likes Netanyahu or likes the Israeli right wing.
Yeah, well, he had a row with Netanyahu at the end of his first term.
Yeah. The interesting thing about Trump is he has rows with lots of people that he kind of has a row and then he goes, okay, fine, you're not so bad.
Well, as long as they're useful to him.
Yeah. It's the art of the deal, John. It's the businessman, you know. But I would say what he will say to Israel is you now have a period of time where you can do whatever you like. We will together provoke Iran. We will together subjugate Iran. You guys will do the fighting and we'll give you the guns, which is going to be the Trumpian view. He's not going to risk American troops anywhere. So there's no more invasion of Iraq or any of that sort of neocon idea. And that's, I think, what's going to happen. So if you are sitting in Bibi Netanyahu's cabinet, if you're a member of the Likud or if you're a member of the settlers in Israel, this is an absolute boon for you. Now, people might say, well, Joe Biden was also a Zionist.
Yeah.
But I think Trump combines Zionism with an evangelical fervor to follow a project which is messianic. And that, I think, is worrying. Now, this may well lead to an end in the Middle East of the wars, but that end will be dictated by the Israelis. And that, I think, is where Trump might fall out with the Saudis, is where he might fall out with the UAE, and where he'll certainly fall out with Europe. And that's, I think, the big falling out.
Absolutely, he'll fall out with Europe because, you know, we're totally at odds, you know, with the ICJ and all the kind of accusations of war crimes. But, you know, having said that, Trump has always run on the ticket, and I've heard it an awful lot of late in his messages of late, is that, you know, in the 4 years that he was in power between 16 and 20, there were no wars. He didn't enter a war. In fact, he stopped wars. So he's totally anti-war. So the third B is Berlin.
It's Berlin, yeah. And
so talk to me about that then.
So I think what Trump's really, really not into is wars that America fight.
Yeah.
Right? That's what I think he's really not into. And it's this idea, he doesn't see why America should be the global policeman. He's like, We've got two big oceans.
Yeah.
We're self-sufficient in everything, in energy and food.
Yeah.
We've got all the innovation. We've got the dollar. We've got,
Yeah.
Why should we bother? Why don't we just look after ourselves? And then that has massive ramifications for the third B, which is Berlin. And I'm using Berlin as a proxy for Europe because Berlin is by far and away the most important city in Europe.
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
Since the Second World War, again, I come back to this architecture that was put in place in Bretton Woods, the underlying assumption in Europe has been America will protect us, right? So the European Union was a trade agreement that flourished under the protective military umbrella of the United States and NATO. And that has been largely the history of Europe, certainly since before we were born, and over the last three or four generations of Europeans. That, again, comes into most stark relief in Ukraine, where Putin invades Ukraine and Ukraine turns to America.
Yeah.
Not Europe.
Yeah.
Europe, yes, in terms of lots of aid and whatever, but the big underwriter of Ukrainian sovereignty is Washington, not Berlin. And as long as you had a democratic Biden-esque government in there, that was the working assumption. That's gone. That is absolutely gone. So I would say what Trump sees is his inauguration is 6th of January, I think.
Yeah.
I would say on the 7th of January, he will see that war ending with a Ukrainian surrender or a land for peace deal.
Yeah. I saw that Zelensky was one of the first to congratulate
But he has to.
Yeah.
I mean, he has to. But I would say that he's going to go for a big international victory, like a geostrategic victory that he can sell to the American people. The American people, I don't know if you were watching it last night, if you were watching the things on the polls that were coming out, what they care about, foreign policy was like 2%,
yes,
3%.
Yeah.
Both Democrats and Republicans, they don't care about it.
Yeah.
They don't give a damn about security.
Yeah.
The only people who worry about security are fellas who work for the Pentagon on CNN.
Yeah.
Nobody else cares about it, right?
True.
So that, I would say, is the deal. It's like Donbass and whatever, and they shift the borders of Ukraine. The Ukrainians are allowed, like the South and North Koreans, to say there was a truce.
Yeah.
And there's a, 38 parallel in Korea, right? Now, long term, if that is the settlement, Ukraine is armed to the teeth by NATO. Donbass is armed to the teeth by Putin. That's a peace that could last. And for the Ukrainians, if the model is to become the South Korea of Eastern Europe, that's not a bad deal.
But they don't enter NATO then?
They don't enter NATO, but they're armed as if they're a NATO member. South Korea isn't a NATO, but it's armed as if it's a NATO member. So there's some sort of way out for the Ukrainians to be able to sell the deal because they've lost hundreds of thousands of their own people, to their own young fellas as well. And it allows Putin out with a certain amount of valedictory honor. He can have the big marches in wherever he wants to have the marches. And that would be something that the Chinese would broker very happily. It would take the steam out of it. I can see that happening.
It's
the implications for Europe is that we are totally exposed because we no longer have the umbrella of the American defense, the Article 5 of NATO, right? It's there, but it's not really there.
Yeah.
And then the idea is that what does Europe do? While we are animated over the Middle East and while we're completely on a collision course with the Americans, we are now, having had free trade with the Americans for decades, now under tariffs, because he wants to tariff us as well.
Yeah.
It's not just China. He wants to tariff everyone, right?
Yeah.
We are dealing with an American administration that is at best ambivalent towards Europe, at worst antagonistic, because they look, hold on a second, Europe is the old world. What are we worried about that?
Yeah.
We need to focus on the Pacific and China and Vietnam and all those countries that are growing. And this is a massive change. And the reason I say Berlin is because it will require leadership from Germany to come up with a new model of European defense and security. And we know that Germany is at the moment going through a period of deep, deep trauma undermined by the fact that their economy, for the first time since the Second World War, is actually looking incredibly fragile.
But maybe there's a fourth B, Mac.
Okay.
Britain.
Oh, rule Britannia. Go for it. Interesting idea.
Maybe that repositions Britain in a much stronger position.
It absolutely does. You're right.
In Europe.
Can you imagine?
Yeah. It's the great comeback.
2016. Well, if Trump can come back, the Brits can come back. 2016, Brexit started. 2026, Britannia is the stepping stone from Washington to the continent. That would be a bizarre and fascinating endpoint. Let's end there. And we'll talk to you tomorrow.